Well, welcome everyone. My name is Paul Biondi. I'm a general partner at Flagship, and I'm really pleased to welcome you here to the Flagship studios at JP Morgan. I'm pleased to have with me today Tony Wood, who is the Chief Scientific Officer at GSK, and I'm really pleased to spend some time today talking together about our collaboration between Flagship and GSK that we signed last summer. This is an innovation supply chain partnership, a term that we use at Flagship, to really talk about how GSK and Flagship can come together, really take the expertise that GSK has in R&D in the areas of respiratory and immunology and marry it up with all of the various different platforms and capabilities that Flagship has in a process that allows us really to pursue, we're hoping 10, transformational medicines in the area of respiratory and immunology. So excited to explore that with you today. Tony, thanks so much for coming. I guess maybe to start, you've been now in this role for about 7 years. Why don't you tell us a little bit just about, the scope of the role and a bit of the strategy and direction that you're trying to take to the role.
So first of all, delighted to be here. Great to spend some time with you Paul. And look, I joined GSK 7 years ago, initially actually doing a broad role in technology. We can come back and talk about that. I picked up the role of CSO now, 2.5 years ago. And so the scope of the role covers the entirety of our R&D portfolio. So that's from specialty medicines, oncology, respiratory, immunology, and inflammation, we're calling it now. And includes vaccines, infectious diseases as well. So literally the whole of the R&D portfolio. And look, probably the best way to describe it for me is to think about our highest level strategy, which is sort of the marriage of science and technology. We talk about science, technology, and culture. And if I focus on respiratory and immunology, then it's really the science of the immune system and technologies like functional genomics, human genetics. We call those bits of technology data technologies. So they're really about just understanding, if you like, the patient and the connection between the patient and the choice of a target. And then, of course, across that portfolio, we're looking to intervene with small molecules, engineered proteins, increasingly broader modalities as well now, like oligonucleotides. We call those platform tech. And I've kind of emphasized those two things just so as I talk about them, your listeners can understand a little bit more where I'm coming from. But it's kind of important for me in terms of how I think about our collaboration.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think one of the things is you personally were just a tremendous champion, right, for putting this in place with us. Tell me a little bit about, what was it that really excited you about kind of working with Flagship and particularly why this, nature of an ISC collaboration with us?
Yeah, look, and a number of things. I sort of followed the Flagship group of companies for a number of years and always admired the quality of people and thinking. And also this sort of interesting marriage of different philosophies and risk frameworks. You were kind enough not to go all the way back in my history, but I've been at this now for well over 30 years, and it's really interesting to see in that time period how the whole proposition of matching targets and patients and different modalities has changed. When I started, it was mostly small molecules. Genome closure hadn't happened. And now we find ourselves in this position where the range of technology we have available to understand disease and then to intervene is like nothing I could have imagined 30 years ago, really like nothing I could have imagined.
It is really quite remarkable, isn't it, when you think about all the modalities and all the different ways that we can drug different targets, right?
But of course, what I can't do, and my main job is about portfolio optimization, the creation of growth and value for GSK, and thinking about new modalities. And look, we were all, you and I, around at the time the monoclonals came to the fore, the late 1980s. The pharma industry, by and large, missed that, right? And so what I wanted to make sure is that we have a collaborative framework that allows us to be able to explore different technologies. Now, of course, the problem you have with that is you're balancing risk in the technology, you're balancing risk as well in the portfolio. And what appealed to me about the relationship with Flagship is a different risk proposition relative to the one at GSK, and one that I think will work perfectly when we look at how best to deploy new platform or indeed data technologies to solve some of the bigger problems that I have in my portfolio that at the moment I can't solve necessarily so easily with what's available on the table for me, if you like.
Oh, that's great. And I think we instantly on the other side saw just your enthusiasm for really trying to think about, and I think partly because you've had this in your past, right, a real focus on platforms and the value that they could create. And I think there was just a natural affinity, you know, with you to say, hey, let's try to figure that out. Just building on that for a second, how do you balance sort of the, you know, what you're doing internally versus what you'd like to do externally and managing that with your team?
Yeah, and look, you can think about it for me as sort of dimensions of, I mentioned the therapeutic areas that we're in. That's typical risk management in terms of capital allocation, and Luke and I spend a lot of time, you know, thinking about what's going into the phase 3 portfolio, looking for growth. If I step back and talk about the data and the platform technologies internally, obviously, and this goes back to the time that Hal was in charge, we've put a lot of investment into human genetics, functional genomics, AI/ML, and I think we're very well placed for that. But when I then look at broader investments in platform technologies, for example, we're in great shape for small molecules, generative AI approaches for that. Actually, increasingly generative AI approaches for protein engineering as well, and beginning to build a capability in oligonucleotides. But look at the broader range of ways in which one might choose to address challenges for the future, gene therapy. That gets harder for us, and well, not harder for us, but it just doesn't make strategic sense to be placing large numbers of bets there. And then, of course, you know, all of the time we're opening new horizons on how to measure biology, if you like, measure disease.
For us, is really nice too, because it allowed us to kind of bring our ecosystem together and really focus, saying, hey, this is what Tony's interested in. Let's see what we can bring to bear on that. And I'm excited about next year at this time what we'll be able to talk about.
You bet, me too.
You know. So you've done a ton of partnerships in the past. You know, from your experience, like what really, you know, what are the key criteria for success in doing a kind of, particularly in the kind of research space like that we're doing in the early areas around, you know, things that are, like I said, are truly novel from a technology perspective?
Yeah, and perhaps what I might do is just talk about two aspects. Personalities, always important for me. And, you know, we spend quite a lot of time, actually probably 2 JP Morgans ago now.
Yeah, you're right.
Talking about how we would bring this together. And it became apparent very quickly, meeting with you and the rest of the Flagship team, that you were a group of people who are very much on the same wavelength that we were. And that is important, because inevitably, both during the early phases of crafting the deal and then post that in the discussions we have over picking the right places to evaluate, that becomes an exercise really in being able to be straightforward and open. Because for me, if I then build on from it's not just the relationships, but really making sure that in the early days, we're spending time talking carefully about what are the key questions that we're trying to solve. Particularly because one of the nice things about this relationship for me is that, you know, whilst I have a view of the Flagship companies, it's nowhere near as sophisticated as the one that you and the rest of the team bring. And therefore, you know, success is at the origin of success is really spending time understanding when we come along with a target concept that is the following, that we spend time really understanding what we mean by that. And inevitably, you get to a good understanding by testing different ideas and being able to say, well, you know, not quite what I was thinking about. And it's kind of one of those things that if we spend time doing that up front, the path from that to interesting and new discoveries, I think, is much clearer, because it just doesn't serve anybody's need to head off in the wrong direction, let it go because it's easy to let it go, and then find yourself later on saying, it wasn't quite what I was thinking of. So for me, what excites me is that our relationship so far is built to a point where all of that is straightforward, and we can approach it as a group of equals who more than trust one another, and therefore can be honest about what we're looking for.
No, and I think that's exactly what we have seen. I think to engage on our side, what we've learned, which is, hey, it's, this is an iteration, right? As you said, which is an initial thinking about, hey, here's something we really would like to solve, or a problem we've really had, and for us to spend time with you really saying, well, here's one approach that could happen, and then to iterate on that and say, oh, okay, I didn't realize that, that's interesting, and to have it in a structure that is, allows us basically to do that, right, in terms of how the IP aspects are set up, and really to try to make it as easy as possible for us to kind of iterate on these pieces, I think has been, already I see the value in doing that. And also the trust that I think that we kind of had going into it to allow for, okay, we couldn't account for everything. So already we're seeing like, okay, this is what we want to do. Then we need to bend and kind of customize this a bit for what we're doing. And I think that that's been a really nice aspect, particularly with your approach, with Kayvon approach on your team, and Chris Austin as well. So that's, I think been, really exciting on our side to have that kind of trust with you.
Yeah, and I mean, I often find that it's important that we sort of recognize that the initial collaboration terms, they're a best guess as to what we think might happen.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, it's important to reflect that if we had a shared purpose, that we then treat the collaboration terms as a best guess. Obviously, they're a framework so that we know how to approach particular aspects like IP and things like that.
Yeah, no, and I think we feel the same way, which is, in some ways, it's been nice to set it up so that it's broad enough, right, to allow us to really explore a lot of different avenues, but flexible enough so that, we can kind of come back and say, okay, this is a little bit different than what maybe we originally thought about. So, so as you take a step back, we've been starting to have a lot of this kind of engagement already as to kind of what we would do. And you look ahead, what, in your mind, kind of what excites you the most about, the impact that we could have on your portfolio and ultimately into patients? And are there particular areas that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, first of all, this idea that we can bring new dimensions of data to understanding the problem. I mean, we should talk a little bit about Vesalius, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a great, you're right, we should.
That kind of moved along in parallel, but a really nice example where philosophically the two groups were very well aligned. I and together with others had thought for some time in areas where there are complex multidimensional diagnostic instruments used for disease, that there were patterns in those instruments that could be suggestive of the underlying biology.
Yeah.
And, I remember the first time I heard about Vesalius thinking, yeah, great, here's a group of people who are thinking about it in exactly the same way. And the idea that those underlying patterns could then be reflected in, let's call them laboratory-based systems.
Yeah.
And that from that comes not only a path for discovery of new approaches, but a more convenient set of clinical instruments to answer questions in areas that have traditionally been quite difficult and expensive to come to outcomes. Now, who knows where we'll go, but
right.
I'm excited about the fact that as well as the programs that we'll choose, we're charting a new path to thinking about how to deal with complex heterogeneous disease in that context. But this idea that there are a set of targets that are embodied in our conversations, some of which I've probably been at for nearly 20 years as a medicinal chemist, and I've got a pretty good idea, I think, about what gets in the way of solving those, and it needs a different modality.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to show that with a different approach, whatever that might be, we're able to solve the underlying problems in the pharmacology that have got in the way of addressing some of those targets. So these are all the sorts of possibilities. Yeah. The headline is doing things together that we couldn't have done apart. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, and I and so many of those aspects kind of excite us. I mean, one is, I'm glad you brought up Vesalius, because for the audience, this is a platform company that we had that really, has a way of trying to deconvolute, what is a broad-based disease into into really what it must be. It's kind of underlying aspects of disease where, we take a broad-based disease, it's really multiple diseases, and trying to come up with novel biology in that space. And this actually ended up being really a parallel relationship, a direct relationship with GSK to Vesalius that we did at the same time, because it was an example where we could see the enthusiasm that you all had to really kind of go deep on that platform. And it's a nice example of, okay, let's customize then the business relationship, based on your interest, versus I think within the ISC context where, we'll hopefully, just find, the ability for you to sample, multiple platforms, maybe not as deeply, but maybe they lead to then a much deeper relationship. And that's certainly our hope, as we kind of take these things forward. The other piece I wanted to go to is like, okay, so we're here at JPM, you've done this many times, but how do you think about, more broadly kind of the partnering aspects between kind of biotech and somebody like GSK, and where because we get this a lot from our companies, which is like, hey, what leads to success, and what, makes it more challenging, given that both sides really need each other, right? All of our platform companies need partners like you to, ultimately bring forward part of their portfolio. And ultimately, you guys are obviously looking to supplement, into your portfolio and solve problems that you couldn't do internally. Yeah,
and look, working in a collaborative network is very much part of the culture and philosophy. At GSK, we talk about getting ahead of disease together, and by together we mean in a broader ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, it's about recognizing that we each individually bring unique skills and experiences, and that the problems that we have in front of us to solve are demanding. And we're going to do a much better job if we recognize how the partnerships bring value from that. And these become about truly exciting collaborations in science that we can't do other than together, is sort of at the heart of all of this for me. Now, of course, within that, and this is very much part of the R&D philosophy that we have at GSK, that means that partnership is not some extra thing that you do on the side. It is very much embedded into the core of our portfolio. I mean, I talk a lot the sort of later stage end of partnering, and an example of a collaboration we've just announced today, that Luke and I very much look at allocation of capital across the portfolio through exactly the same lens, inside or out. And for me, that's core to success, so that we view the programs we do with you in exactly the same ways I view internal programs. And
it really comes across, I have to say, in interacting with you and your team, just that openness to exactly that. Like, hey, we are looking for just as much innovation externally as we are trying to do it internally. And it's been really, to date, a real pleasure working together. I'm excited about what we can do in the coming year and beyond, and really want to thank you, Tony, for taking the time out of your obviously very busy schedule to talk to us and for your partnership.
No, my pleasure, and I look forward to perhaps we come back in a year's time and we talk about
exactly
what we've discovered in that time
tremendous
period.
Things we've initiated. So that's great. Well, thanks again.
Right. And a pleasure to be here. Thank you for considering me.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and look forward to talking to you again next year. So
great. Thank you.
Thanks.